Did you know that Alfred Hitchcock, the man everyone calls the master of suspense, actually cried on the set of Rebecca? Not because of sadness, not because of joy, but because a powerful woman in Hollywood made him feel like a schoolboy who had done everything wrong. That woman was Selznick, David O. Selznick, the producer who controlled every single word, every single shot, and every single shadow in this movie. Hitchcock had just arrived in America from England. He was full of dreams, full of ideas. But Hollywood had different rules, and Rebecca became the battlefield where two giant egos clashed in the dark. Result? A movie that won Best Picture. A movie that still haunts people more than 80 years later. A movie where you never even see the villain, because she's already dead. So grab your seat, turn down the lights, and get ready. Let's dive in and discover 20 weird and amazing facts about Rebecca. Number 20. Hitchcock didn't even want to make this movie. Here's something that might surprise you. Alfred Hitchcock, the director whose name is forever connected to Rebecca, didn't want to make this film. Not at first, not even close. When producer David O. Selznick bought the rights to Daphne du Maurier's best-selling novel in 1938, he paid a huge amount of money for it, around $50,000. That was a fortune back then. Selznick had just finished producing Gone with the Wind and was riding high on success. He wanted another prestige picture, something classy, something dark, something British. And that's where Hitchcock came in. Selznick brought Hitchcock over from England with a contract to direct multiple films. But Hitchcock had his eye on a different project. He wanted to make a movie about the sinking of the Titanic. Yes, you read that right. Hitchcock imagined a grand, terrifying film about the famous ship going down in the icy Atlantic. He thought it would be the perfect way to introduce himself to American audiences. Big, bold, unforgettable. But Selznick said no. He told Hitchcock that Rebecca was the priority. The book was a massive hit. Readers all over the world were obsessed with the story of the unnamed second wife, the mysterious Manderley estate, and the ghost-like presence of the dead first wife, Rebecca. Selznick believed this was the movie that would make both of them legends in Hollywood. Hitchcock pushed back. He argued. He sulked. He even suggested changes to the story that would make it more of a thriller and less of a romance. Selznick held firm. He owned the contract. He owned the rights. And in Hollywood, the man with the money makes the rules. So Hitchcock gave in. Reluctantly, unhappily. Like a painter being told exactly what colors to use. And yet, something magical happened. That tension between director and producer, that friction, that constant push and pull, ended up creating something extraordinary. The frustration Hitchcock felt seeped into the film itself. You can feel it in every frame, the unease, the claustrophobia, the sense that someone is always watching, always judging. The movie he didn't want to make became the movie that changed his career forever. Sometimes the best art comes from the worst arguments. Number 19. The heroine has no name. On purpose. This is one of the strangest things about Rebecca, and most people don't even notice it the first time they watch the film. The main character, the young woman played by Joan Fontaine, never has a name. Not once. Not in the entire movie. Think about that for a second. She's on screen for nearly 2 hours. She falls in love. She gets married. She moves into a giant mansion. She faces danger, jealousy, suspicion, and fear. And yet nobody ever calls her by her first name. In the book by Daphne du Maurier, it's the same. The narrator is simply I. She refers to herself, but never tells us who she is. When Selznick and Hitchcock adapted the novel for the screen, they kept this strange, unsettling detail. The young wife is always called Madam or Mrs. De Winter by the servants. Her husband, Maxim, calls her Darling or My Dear. But a real, personal name? Never. This was a very deliberate choice. By removing her name, the filmmakers made the audience feel exactly what the character feels. She is invisible. She is unimportant. She is living in the enormous shadow of Rebecca, the first wife, whose name everyone remembers, everyone speaks, everyone practically worships. Rebecca is dead, but her name echoes through every hallway of Manderley. The new wife is alive, breathing, standing right there. And yet she is nameless. A ghost among ghosts. Joan Fontaine later said that this namelessness actually helped her performance. She said it made her feel small on set, unsure, like she didn't quite belong, and that's exactly how the character is supposed to feel. The absence of a name became one of the most powerful storytelling tools in the entire film. She had everything: a mansion, a husband, wealth. She didn't even have a name. Number 18. Joan Fontaine and Laurence Olivier hated each other. On screen, Joan Fontaine and Laurence Olivier looked like a couple caught in a complicated, passionate love story. Behind the camera, the reality was very different. They could barely stand each other. Laurence Olivier did not want Joan Fontaine in this movie. He wanted his real-life girlfriend, Vivien Leigh, to play the role of the second Mrs. De Winter. Vivien Leigh had just become the biggest star in the world after playing Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind. Olivier thought she was perfect. He lobbied for her. He insisted. He practically begged Selznick. But Selznick said no. He felt Vivien Leigh was too strong, too glamorous, too confident for the role. The second Mrs. De Winter needed to be shy, nervous, almost mousy. Joan Fontaine fit that description perfectly. So Fontaine got the part, and Olivier was furious. From the very first day on set, he was cold to her, distant, sometimes even cruel. He would ignore her between takes. He would make small, cutting remarks about her acting. He treated her like she was beneath him, like she was an amateur who had stumbled onto a professional stage. And here's the twisted genius of it all. Hitchcock saw this happening and did nothing to stop it. In fact, some say he encouraged it. He reportedly told Fontaine that nobody on set liked her, that the crew thought she was wrong for the part, that Olivier wished she would disappear. Whether this was true or exaggerated, it worked. Fontaine became genuinely anxious, genuinely insecure, genuinely afraid, and that raw, real emotion poured directly into her performance. Every time you see her flinch on screen, every time she looks uncertain or scared, part of that was not acting. It was real. The set of Rebecca was not a happy place, but the unhappiness created something unforgettable. What looked like delicate romance on screen was Cold War behind the scenes. Number 17. Hitchcock was treated like a hired hand. Alfred Hitchcock came to Hollywood as one of the most famous directors in England. He had made hit after hit. The 39 Steps, The Lady Vanishes. He was respected, celebrated. Critics called him a genius. But when he arrived on the set of Rebecca, he discovered something shocking. In Hollywood, the director was not the king. The producer was. David O. Selznick controlled everything. He sent Hitchcock long, detailed memos, sometimes 10 or 15 pages, telling him exactly how to shoot each scene, where to put the camera, how long a shot should last, what expression an actor should make. Hitchcock was used to having complete freedom. In England, he planned every shot in advance, drew detailed storyboards, and ran his sets like a quiet, efficient machine. Nobody questioned him. Nobody rewrote his decisions, but Selznick questioned everything. He rewrote dialogue the night before shooting. He demanded reshoots. He sat in the editing room and changed the order of scenes. Hitchcock later compared the experience to being a prisoner. He said making Rebecca was like painting a beautiful picture while someone else held your hand and moved the brush. The two men argued constantly. Hitchcock wanted to add dark humor and visual tricks. Selznick wanted faithful adaptation and emotional drama. They fought over the ending. They fought over the music. They fought over how much of Manderley to show. In the end, Selznick usually won, because Selznick had the final cut. But Hitchcock learned a powerful lesson from this experience. He swore that he would never again work under a producer who had that much control. And he kept that promise. Every film he made after Rebecca, from Rear Window to Psycho to Vertigo, was made on his own terms. Rebecca was Hitchcock's first American film. It was also his last film as someone else's employee. The cage made the bird stronger. Number 15. Daphne du Maurier. Hated the movie. You might expect that the author of the original novel would be thrilled to see her story on the big screen, produced by the biggest producer in Hollywood and directed by the most famous thriller director in the world. But Daphne du Maurier was not thrilled. She was actually quite upset. Du Maurier felt that the film changed too many important details from her book. In the novel, there's a crucial twist about how Rebecca actually died. Without giving too much away, the book makes it very clear that Maxim de Winter is not entirely innocent. But Hollywood in 1940 had something called the Hays Code. This was a strict set of rules that governed what movies could and could not show. Under the Hays Code, a character who committed a serious crime had to be punished on screen. There could be no sympathy for wrongdoing. Selznick and his screenwriters had to change the story to satisfy the censors. The result was a softer, more ambiguous version of events. Du Maurier thought this change weakened the entire story. She felt it removed the dark, uncomfortable truth at the heart of her novel and replaced it with something safer and more Hollywood-friendly. She also wasn't happy with the casting. She had imagined a different kind of Maxime, rougher, more dangerous, more unpredictable. Laurence Olivier, while brilliant, played Maxime as a tortured romantic hero, which wasn't quite what du Maurier had written. Still, despite her complaints, the film became a massive success. It won the Academy Award for Best Picture. It introduced millions of new readers to her book. And over time, even du Maurier softened her opinion slightly, acknowledging that the film had its own kind of power. But she never fully forgave the changes. The writer gave them a dark jewel. Hollywood polished it until it shone, but something raw was lost in the gleaming. Number 13. Mrs. Danvers was almost played by a man. Here's a fact that sounds almost unbelievable, but it's true. Before Judith Anderson was cast as the terrifying housekeeper Mrs. Danvers, there was a serious discussion about casting a man in the role. Not as a joke, not as a gimmick, but as a genuine creative choice. Some people involved in early development thought that making Mrs. Danvers a male character, a butler perhaps, might add a different kind of menace to the story. A cold, formal, powerful man who guarded Rebecca's memory with obsessive devotion. It would have changed the entire dynamic of the film. But ultimately, Selznick and Hitchcock agreed that the character had to be a woman. The relationship between Mrs. Danvers and Rebecca, as written in the novel, carries a deep, almost romantic intensity. Mrs. Danvers doesn't just admire Rebecca. She worships her, she preserves her room like a shrine. She touches her clothes with reverence. She speaks about her beauty with a passion that goes beyond loyalty. Making that character a man would have diluted this strange, powerful bond. Judith Anderson, an Australian-born stage actress, brought something extraordinary to the role. She played Mrs. Danvers with an almost supernatural stillness. She barely blinks. She barely moves. She seems to glide rather than walk. Hitchcock instructed her never to be seen moving. The camera would cut to her already standing somewhere, as if she had materialized out of thin air. This gave Mrs. Danvers a ghostly quality that perfectly matched her role as the guardian of a dead woman's legacy. Anderson's performance is now considered one of the greatest villain portrayals in film history. And to think, the character almost became a butler in a black suit. The stillness of a woman proved far more frightening than any man could have been. Number 12. Hitchcock made a secret cameo, but almost cut it. Alfred Hitchcock is famous for his cameo appearances. In nearly every film he directed, he would pop up somewhere in the background, walking down a street, standing in a crowd, riding a bus. It became a beloved tradition. Audiences would watch his movies and try to spot him, like a game of hide-and-seek. In Rebecca, his cameo almost didn't happen. Hitchcock appears very briefly near the end of the film. You can see him walking past a phone booth just after a character makes an important call. It lasts only a few seconds. Blink, and you'll miss it. But during editing, Hitchcock considered removing it. He worried that in such a dark, serious, atmospheric film, his little cameo might feel silly. Rebecca wasn't a light thriller or a playful mystery. It was a brooding Gothic drama about obsession, identity, and death. A chubby British man wandering through the background might break the spell. Selznick, interestingly, wanted to keep it. He thought audiences would enjoy the little Easter egg. He also knew that Hitchcock's cameos were becoming a trademark, and removing one might disappoint fans. So the cameo stayed, and it's a good thing it did. Over the decades, Hitchcock's cameo in Rebecca has become one of the most hunted-for moments in his entire filmography. People pause, rewind, and slow down the footage just to catch that brief glimpse. It's funny how something so small can become so important. A 2-second walk past a phone booth, and 80 years later, people are still looking for it. The smallest moments sometimes leave the biggest marks. Number 11. The sea was never really there. Rebecca is a movie that feels deeply connected to the ocean. The story begins on the coast of Monte Carlo. Manderley sits on the cliffs above the sea. The waves crash against the rocks far below. You can almost smell the salt and feel the spray. But here's the thing. Almost none of that ocean footage was real. The vast majority of the sea scenes in Rebecca were created using rear projection, matte paintings, and special effects. The actors stood on carefully built studio sets while images of the ocean were projected behind them. The cliffs, the shoreline, the crashing waves, all of it was manufactured inside Selznick's studio in Culver City, California. The matte paintings created by the brilliant Jack Cosgrove were astonishingly detailed. Cosgrove painted vast seascapes and merged them seamlessly with the live-action footage. When you watch the scene where the new Mrs. De Winter stands at the edge of the cliff and looks down at the churning sea below, you're actually watching a woman standing on a platform about 3 feet off the ground, looking at a painted backdrop. The illusion is perfect. Hitchcock, who was a master of controlled filmmaking, actually preferred working this way. He didn't like shooting on location because he couldn't control the weather, the light, or the noise. In a studio, everything could be managed. Every shadow could be placed. Every wave could be timed. The artificial sea became more dramatic than any real ocean could have been because Hitchcock could make it do exactly what the story needed. Angry waves when the mood was dark, calm waters when things seemed peaceful. The ocean became an actor in the film, and like all the other actors, it followed the director's instructions perfectly. What felt like wild, untamed nature was actually the most controlled set in Hollywood. Number 10. Laurence Olivier. Almost quit the film. Laurence Olivier was already a major star when he was cast as Maxime de Winter. He was considered one of the finest actors of his generation, a Shakespearean legend with the voice of thunder and the presence of a king. But during the production of Rebecca, he came very close to walking away from the entire project. The main reason was his frustration over Vivien Leigh not being cast as his co-star. As mentioned earlier, Olivier desperately wanted Leigh for the role. When Joan Fontaine was chosen instead, Olivier took it personally. He felt that Selznick had insulted his judgment and rejected the woman he loved. But there was another reason too. Olivier found Hitchcock's directing style suffocating. Olivier came from the theater, where actors were free to experiment, to try different approaches, to find their characters through rehearsal and improvisation. Hitchcock was the opposite. He planned every shot in advance and expected actors to hit their marks precisely, like pieces on a chessboard. Hitchcock once famously said that actors should be treated like cattle. Olivier, who saw acting as a sacred art, found this attitude unbearable. There were days when Olivier would deliver what he thought was a magnificent, emotionally rich performance, only to have Hitchcock say, "That was fine," and move on without any discussion. For an actor who craved feedback and artistic collaboration, This was maddening. He complained to Selznick. He threatened to leave. At one point, the production was genuinely in danger of losing its leading man. But Selznick smoothed things over. He flattered Olivier. He reminded him of the prestige of the project. And slowly, reluctantly, Olivier stayed. His performance as Maxime de Winter remains one of his most memorable roles. But behind that brooding, magnetic screen presence was a very unhappy actor counting the days until the film was finished. The performance was brilliant. The experience was miserable. Number 9. The music almost told too much. The score for Rebecca was composed by Franz Waxman, a German-born composer who had already made a name for himself in Hollywood with dark, atmospheric music. Waxman created a hauntingly beautiful score for the film, full of sweeping strings, eerie melodies, and moments of breathtaking tenderness. But there was a problem. Selznick felt that Waxman's original score was too revealing. In certain scenes, the music practically gave away plot points before they happened. When a scene was supposed to feel mysterious and uncertain, the music would swell in a way that hinted at danger. When a character was supposed to seem trustworthy, the music would add a dark undertone that suggested otherwise. Selznick sent Waxman memo after memo asking him to pull back, make the music more neutral in key scenes. Don't tell the audience what to feel too early. Let the suspense build naturally. Waxman, like Hitchcock, found Selznick's constant interference exhausting. But he was a professional, and he reworked the score multiple times until Selznick was satisfied. The final version of the music is a masterpiece of restraint. It supports the story without overwhelming it. It hints without revealing. It whispers when it could scream. One particular theme associated with Rebecca herself is a simple, elegant melody that recurs throughout the film. You hear it when characters talk about Rebecca. You hear it when the camera lingers on her belongings. It's beautiful and sad and just slightly unsettling, like a love letter written by someone who might not be entirely sane. Waxman received an Academy Award nomination for his work on Rebecca, though he didn't win that year. But the score has endured as one of the finest examples of Golden Age Hollywood music. The notes never screamed, but they told you everything. Number 8. The opening dream sequence was filmed. Last night I dreamt I went to Manderley again. Those are the very first words you hear in Rebecca. Joan Fontaine speaks them in a soft, almost trance-like voice over a misty, dreamlike image of the ruined Manderley estate. It's one of the most famous opening lines in movie history, and it was the very last thing they filmed. This might seem backward, but it actually makes perfect sense. Hitchcock wanted Fontaine to deliver that line with the weight of the entire story behind it. If she had recorded it at the beginning of production, she wouldn't have yet lived through the emotional journey of making the film. By the end of shooting, Fontaine was exhausted. She had spent months feeling isolated, anxious, and overwhelmed, partly because of her character and partly because of the difficult atmosphere on set. And that weariness, that bone-deep tiredness, is exactly what you hear in her voice during the opening narration. It doesn't sound like acting. It sounds like memory, like someone looking back at something painful and beautiful from a great distance. The visual effects for the opening sequence were also incredibly complex. The camera appears to travel up a long, winding path toward the ruins of Manderley, pushing through overgrown gates and tangled vegetation. This was achieved using a combination of miniatures, matte paintings, and very careful camera movement. The fog was real, created using smoke machines on the soundstage, but the mansion, the path, the gates, all painted and sculpted by hand. The entire sequence lasts less than 2 minutes, but it took days to complete. Every element had to blend perfectly to create that dreamlike, ghostly quality. And it worked. 84 years later, that opening still gives people chills. The last thing they filmed became the first thing you remember. Number 7. Fontaine wore. Intentionally ugly clothes, costume design in Hollywood is usually about making stars look their best. glamorous gowns, sparkling jewelry, perfect hair. But in Rebecca, the costume department did something unusual. They deliberately made Joan Fontaine look plain, almost frumpy. This was a conscious decision by Hitchcock and Selznick. The new Mrs. De Winter is supposed to feel out of place in the elegant world of Manderley. She is a former paid companion, a girl from a modest background who suddenly finds herself married to a wealthy aristocrat. She doesn't belong in silk and diamonds. She belongs in simple, unremarkable clothing. So that's exactly what they gave her. Fontaine's costumes in the first half of the film are boxy, shapeless, and deliberately unflattering. Her hairstyle is plain. Her accessories are minimal. She looks like a sparrow in a house full of peacocks. Meanwhile, every trace of Rebecca, her room, her things, her monogrammed belongings, radiates elegance and sophistication. The contrast is painful and powerful. You can see how small and ordinary the new wife feels just by looking at what she's wearing. As the film progresses and the character gains a tiny bit of confidence, her clothing improves slightly. The cuts become a little more flattering. The colors become a little warmer. But she never reaches the level of glamour that Rebecca apparently possessed. This was Hitchcock's visual storytelling at its finest. He didn't need dialogue to show you the power imbalance. He showed you through fabric and buttons and hemline. Fontaine reportedly didn't enjoy wearing the dowdy outfits. She was a young, beautiful actress who wanted to look her best on the big screen. But she understood the purpose, and she trusted the director's vision. What she wore told you who she was, or rather, who she wasn't. Plain clothes held more drama than any ball gown ever could. Number 6. Selznick fired the first screenwriters. Adapting Daphne du Maurier's novel to the screen was a nightmare. The book is written entirely in first person, full of internal thoughts, memories, and feelings that don't translate easily to film. Selznick went through multiple screenwriting teams before he was satisfied. The first writers he hired were Joan Harrison and Philip MacDonald, who worked closely with Hitchcock to create a screenplay that captured the mood and mystery of the novel. But Selznick wasn't happy. He felt the script strayed too far from the source material. He wanted a faithful adaptation, almost word for word in key scenes. So he brought in playwright Robert E. Sherwood, a Pulitzer Prize winner, to rewrite the script. Sherwood was a prestige hire, a serious dramatist who Selznick hoped would bring literary quality to the screenplay. But even Sherwood's work wasn't enough. Selznick himself sat down and rewrote pages, sometimes entire scenes, the night before they were to be filmed. Actors would arrive on set in the morning and find new dialogue waiting for them, freshly typed, still warm from Selznick's typewriter. Hitchcock found this incredibly frustrating. He liked to prepare meticulously, to know exactly what every scene would contain before he stepped on set. Having the script change overnight made his careful planning useless. The final screenplay is credited to Robert E. Sherwood and Joan Harrison, but the truth is that dozens of hands touched those pages. Selznick's fingerprints are on nearly every scene. Some dialogue came from the novel verbatim. Some came from Sherwood's dramatic instincts. Some came from Hitchcock's visual imagination. And some came from Selznick's 3 a.m. rewrites. The script that audiences eventually heard was a patchwork quilt, stitched together from many different fabrics, but somehow forming one beautiful, haunting whole. Too many cooks should have spoiled the broth. Instead, it became a feast. Number 5. Judith Anderson. Never blinked on screen. We already talked about Judith Anderson's ghostly performance as Mrs. Danvers. But here's a specific detail that makes her performance even more incredible. Hitchcock instructed her to never blink on camera. Think about how difficult that is. Blinking is one of the most automatic things a human being does. We blink thousands of times a day without thinking about it. But Hitchcock believed that if Mrs. Danvers never blinked, she would feel inhuman, otherworldly, like a statue that had somehow come to life. Anderson practiced this technique for hours. She trained herself to keep her eyes wide open for extended periods, even during long takes. When you watch her scenes closely, you'll notice that her eyes are almost always still, fixed, unblinking. It creates an incredibly unsettling effect, even if you can't quite pinpoint why she makes you uncomfortable. Combined with Hitchcock's direction that she never be seen walking, the camera always cuts to her already standing somewhere, the no-blinking rule turned Mrs. Danvers into something that feels barely human. She's more like a piece of Manderley itself, part of the walls, part of the shadows, always there, always watching, always still. Anderson later said that the no-blinking direction was one of the hardest physical challenges she'd ever faced as an actress. Her eyes would water. They would sting. But she kept going. She understood what Hitchcock was trying to achieve, and she committed fully. The result is one of the most genuinely creepy performances in cinema history. No special effects, no makeup tricks, no horror movie gimmicks, just a woman who refused to blink. And that was more terrifying than any monster. Open eyes see everything, and that's what makes them frightening. Number 3. Manderley was entirely imaginary. Manderley is one of the most famous houses in movie history. It feels as real as any building you've ever seen. The long driveway, the towering facade, the grand hallways, the enormous rooms filled with antiques and shadows. When you watch Rebecca, you feel like you could reach out and touch the cold stone walls. But Manderley never existed. Not as a real building. Not even as a complete set. The exterior of Manderley was a miniature model, about 3 feet tall, built by the effects team and photographed from low angles to make it look enormous. Different sections of the interior were built as separate sets on different sound stages. The grand hallway was on one stage. The morning room was on another. Rebecca's bedroom was on a third. They were never connected. If you had walked through a door on one set, you would have stepped into nothing, just the back wall of a soundstage and a bunch of lighting equipment. The genius of the filmmaking is that you never notice this. Through careful editing, consistent set decoration, and Hitchcock's precise visual style, the separate sets feel like one continuous, breathing house. You believe Manderley is real because the film never gives you a reason to doubt it. Lyle Wheeler, the art director, studied real English country estates for inspiration. He looked at photographs of houses like Milton Hall and Menabilly, which was actually the house that inspired Daphne du Maurier's novel. He borrowed details from each, a fireplace from one, a staircase from another, a window from a third, and combined them into Manderley. The result is a house that feels more real than any real house could, because it was designed specifically for this story. Every room reflects the psychology of the characters. The grand spaces feel oppressive rather than impressive. The intimate rooms feel like traps rather than retreat. Manderley wasn't a place, it was a feeling. And feelings don't need foundation. Number 2. Hitchcock used food to torment Fontaine. Alfred Hitchcock was famous for his dark sense of humor and his willingness to manipulate actors to get the performances he wanted. On the set of Rebecca, Joan Fontaine was his primary target. Beyond telling her that the cast and crew disliked her, Hitchcock found other creative ways to keep her off balance. One of the most peculiar was his use of food. Hitchcock was a serious food lover. He talked about food constantly, planned elaborate meals, and took enormous pleasure in eating. During the production, he would often describe lavish, delicious meals in great detail, right in front of Fontaine, who was on a strict diet to maintain her slim, waif-like appearance for the role. He would talk about rich French sauces, perfectly roasted meats, and elaborate desserts while Fontaine nibbled on salad. Whether he was consciously trying to torment her or simply being his usual food-obsessed self is debatable. But Fontaine felt it as another form of psychological pressure. She later described the shoot as one of the most difficult experiences of her career. She felt constantly tested, constantly judged, constantly on edge. And yet, she also acknowledged that Hitchcock's methods, however uncomfortable, produced results. Her performance in Rebecca is raw, and authentic in a way that few performances of that era were. She seems genuinely vulnerable, genuinely lost, genuinely afraid. And much of that authenticity came from real emotions stirred up by Hitchcock's manipulation. Years later, Fontaine would work with Hitchcock again on Suspicion, for which she won the Academy Award. Their relationship remained complicated, part trust, part resentment, part grudging admiration. He pushed her, she resisted. And the push and pull created something extraordinary both times. The cruelest director helped create the most tender performance. Number 1. Rebecca won Best Picture. But Hitchcock never won Best Director. This is perhaps the strangest and saddest fact about Rebecca. The film won the Academy Award for Best Picture at the 1941 ceremony. It beat out incredible competition, including The Grapes of Wrath, The Philadelphia Story, and The Great Dictator. It was a triumph, a validation, proof that this dark, gothic, British-flavored film could conquer Hollywood. But Alfred Hitchcock did not win the Academy Award for Best Director. He was nominated, yes. But the award went to John Ford for The Grapes of Wrath. And here's the truly remarkable part. Hitchcock was nominated for Best Director 5 times throughout his career. 5 times. And he never won. Not once. Not for Rebecca, not for Rear Window, not for Psycho. The man who is universally considered one of the greatest directors who ever lived, whose name is literally synonymous with brilliant filmmaking, never held that golden statue. Rebecca remains the only Hitchcock film to win Best Picture, and even then, the award technically went to David O. Selznick as the producer. In the Academy's eyes, Best Picture belongs to the producer, not the director. So Selznick, the man who controlled every aspect of the production, who sent those endless memos, who rewrote the script at 3 a.m, who told Hitchcock where to put the camera, he's the one who took home the top prize. Hitchcock received a nomination and polite applause. There's a painful irony in this. The film that introduced Hitchcock to America, the film that launched his legendary Hollywood career, gave its highest honor to someone else. Hitchcock's genius built the house. Selznick's name went on the door. The greatest director never got the greatest prize, and that might be the weirdest fact of all. Bonus fact: the portrait that was never painted. Here's a hidden detail that most viewers miss entirely, and even some film scholars overlook. Throughout Rebecca, there are references to a portrait of Rebecca that once hung in the Manderley Gallery. Characters talk about it. The new Mrs. De Winter imagines it. Mrs. Danvers practically prays to it. But you never see it. Not once. Hitchcock made a very deliberate decision to never show Rebecca's face. Not in a photograph, not in a painting, not in a flashback, not in any form. She is the most important character in the film. The entire story revolves around her, and yet she remains completely invisible. This was a radical choice. Selznick initially wanted to cast an actress to appear in brief flashbacks as Rebecca. He even considered using a body double, someone whose face would always be turned away or in shadow, to give Rebecca a physical presence. But Hitchcock argued fiercely against this. He believed that showing Rebecca in any way, even partially, would diminish her power. As long as Rebecca remained unseen, she could be anything. She could be the most beautiful woman who ever lived. She could be terrifying. She could be perfect. Every viewer could imagine their own version of Rebecca, and that imagined version would always be more powerful than any actress on screen. Hitchcock understood something profound about fear and fascination. The things we can't see are always more powerful than the things we can. A closed door is scarier than an open one. A shadow is more threatening than a face. By keeping Rebecca invisible, Hitchcock turned her into something almost supernatural. She became an idea rather than a person, a force rather than a character. And ideas, unlike people, can never be defeated. They can never grow old. They can never disappoint. The painting that was never painted became the most vivid image in the film. What you never see haunts you the longest. Rebecca is more than a movie. It's a mirror. It shows us what happens when we live in someone else's shadow, when we measure ourselves against a memory, when we let the past control the present. It's about identity, about courage, about finding your own voice in a house full of echoes. Made in 1940 by a director who felt trapped, starring an actress who felt unwanted, based on a novel about a woman who felt invisible. Rebecca somehow turned all that pain and frustration into something beautiful, something timeless, something that still speaks to us across the decades. Every person who has ever felt small, every person who has ever walked into a room and felt like they didn't belong, every person who has ever been compared to someone else and found wanting. This movie is for you. It tells you that the shadows eventually fade, that the fire eventually comes, and that the person who survives the storm is the one who finds the courage to stop being afraid. If you enjoyed these stories, subscribe for more. Every movie hides a truth, and we'll keep uncovering them one story at a time.